Iron rattled against sun-baked stone as Estella collapsed onto the desert floor. 3 days without water had left her lips cracked and bleeding. The slavers who'd chained her to this desolate outcropping had been clear: she would break or she would die. In the distance, dust swirled on the horizon, marking either her doom or salvation. A lone figure emerged through the heat waves, a man whose weathered face told stories his lips would not. Atoi approached without fear, his dark eyes taking in her chains, her wounds, her defiance. He knelt beside her, not with words, but with the quiet certainty of someone who recognized suffering as an old companion. With tools worn smooth by years of use, he broke what bound her to her fate. Can two wounded souls forge a future when both are haunted by the ghosts of their past? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sound of metal striking metal echoed across the barren landscape. Estella flinched with each blow, certain that death would follow. Instead, the shackles fell away from her raw ankles, leaving rings of bloodied skin where iron had chafed for weeks. "Water," the man said, his voice rough from disuse. He offered a leather pouch, worn smooth at the edges. Estella stared at him through sunburned eyelids. Was this another torment? To offer salvation only to snatch it away? Her captors had played such games before, the man Apache by his dress and the dark eyes that held her steadily simply waited. No demands, no threats. Just the offered water dot with trembling hands. She took the pouch. The first sip brought tears to her eyes. The second awakened a desperate thirst. She would have gulped it all had he not gently pulled it back. "Slow," he cautioned. "Too much will make you sick. Who are you?" Estella managed, her voice a painful rasp. "Atoi." The name rolled off his tongue like a prayer. Nothing more followed. She tried to stand, but swayed dangerously. 3 days baking in the desert sun had stolen her strength. The world tilted, dark. Spots dancing across her vision-dot strong arms caught her before she hit the ground. Through the haze of consciousness, she felt herself being lifted, cradled against a chest that smelled of sage and wood smoke. "Why?" she whispered. Atoi looked down at her, his expression unreadable beneath the shadow of his broad-brimmed hat. Some chains should be broken. Memory flickered like heat, lightning across Estella's mind-rough hands, dragging her from her. Father's store, the crack of a pistol, her father crumpling to the floor, blood pooling beneath him. Weeks of being passed from one group of slavers to another, moving north into territories where Mexican authorities wouldn't follow. Then the final indignity, chained to die because she'd fought back once too often. The steady rhythm of Atohi's stride lulled her. Despite years of learned caution, exhaustion claimed her. She surrendered to unconsciousness, her head resting against the shoulder of a man whose name she'd only just learned. Atoi carried her with practiced ease. His eyes constantly scanned the horizon, alert for dust clouds that would signal returning. Slavers, they would not be pleased to find their lesson in discipline interrupted. He followed a route only visible to one who knew the desert intimately, a path that wandered between rocky outcroppings, through dry washes, and toward a distant mesa that shimmered in the late afternoon heat. The woman in his arms was light too light. Her wrists and ankles bore the marks of prolonged captivity. Beneath the dirt and blood, her face retained traces of beauty that hardship had not yet erased. Spanish blood, he guessed, mixed with native heritage. It was not his concern. And yet, he had broken his years of solitude to intercede dot as the sun began its descent. Painting the sandstone cliffs in brilliant orange, Atoi approached a narrow passage between towering rocks. To casual observers, it appeared to be nothing more than a shadow cast by the setting sun. To those who knew, it was the entrance to safety. He paused, listening for sounds that didn't belong a horse's snort, the clink of metal, human voices. Hearing nothing but the whisper of the evening breeze, he adjusted his precious burden and slipped into the narrow cleft. The temperature dropped immediately as sunlight gave way to shadow. The passage wound between high walls of striated stone, barely wide enough for a man to walk through sideways in some places. After 100 paces, it opened suddenly into a hidden canyon, a sanctuary carved by ancient waters and guarded by sheer cliffs on all sides. Here, sheltered by stone sentinels, stood a small settlement of traditional Apache wickiups, their dome-shaped frames covered with hides and canvas. A trickle of water ran down one wall of the canyon, feeding a small pool before disappearing into the earth. Estella woke to the scent of juniper smoke and the soft crackle of a small fire. For a moment, disorientation gripped her, the unfamiliar. Roof of woven branches above, the soft bedding beneath her, the absence of chains. Her heart raced until memory returned. The silent Apache. Her rescue. She pushed herself upright, wincing as her body protested movements long restricted by shackles. The interior of the wickiup was neat and sparse, a bedroll, several clay pots, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the supports, and a small fire pit at the center where embers glowed softly. A shadow crossed the entrance. Atoi ducked inside, carrying a worn leather bundle. He nodded, seeing her awake, but made no comment on her improved condition. "Where am I?" Estella asked, her voice stronger after hours of rest. "Safe place." His Spanish was accented, but clear. "Can you know?" He knelt beside her, unrolling the leather bundle to reveal an array of small pouches, carved wooden containers, and a collection of smooth stones. A medicine bundle, she realized, recognizing similar tools her grandmother had used years ago. Atohi pointed to her ankles, raising an eyebrow in question. Estella extended her legs, revealing the raw, infected skin where the shackles had cut deep. Without comment, he selected a small clay jar, removing its pine needle stopper. The salve inside smelled of pinnin and something bitter. With surprising gentleness, his weathered hands applied the medicine to her wounds. "Why did you help me?" she asked, watching his methodical work. He continued his ministrations without looking up. "Sky Spirit showed me." "You could have left me." This earned her a brief glance. Could have, didn't. The simplicity of his answer struck her. In her experience, men always wanted something in return for their help, especially from a woman alone, as if reading her thoughts. Atoi finished bandaging her ankles with strips of clean cloth and moved to sit across the fire from her, establishing distance. He gestured toward a clay bowl near her bedding. "Eat, strength returns." The stew inside was still warm rabbit with wild onions and unfamiliar herbs. Estella hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first spoonful touched her lips. She ate, slowly, remembering his earlier warning about consuming too much too quickly. Between bites, she studied her surroundings more carefully. The wickiup was larger than it had first appeared, with space for sleeping, cooking, and storage. Various items hung from the frame bundles of feathers, small pouches, what appeared to be weapons wrapped in hide. But what caught her attention were the symbols painted on the interior, supports patterns she didn't recognize but understood, instinctively as significant. Protection symbols, perhaps, or prayers. "You live alone?" she asked, setting down the empty bowl. Atoi nodded. "Long time." "But this place," she gestured around, "it could hold many people." A shadow crossed his face. Once did. He stood abruptly, taking the bowl. "Rest. Dawn comes early." After he left, Estella listened to the night sounds filtering through the wickiup walls, the soft call of a night bird, the distant trickle of water, the whisper of wind through juniper branches. So different from the harsh sounds of the slaver, campmen's coarse laughter, the crack of whips, the sobbing of newly captured women. She lay back down, pulling the surprisingly soft blanket around her shoulders. Questions tumbled through her mind. Who was this solitary Apache with his gentle hands and few words? What had happened to the people who once lived here? And what would become of her now? Sleep claimed her before answers came, deeper and more restful than any she had known since. Her capture. For the first time in weeks, she dreamed not of chains, but of running free across an open mesa, the wind in her hair and the sun warm upon her face. Days melted into one another like candle wax. Estella's strength returned gradually, nurtured by Atohi's medicines and the wholesome food he provided. At first, she slept most of the day, her body reclaiming what captivity had stolen. Atoi came and went silently, tending to her wounds, bringing food, disappearing for hours at a time to hunt or gather plants. On the fourth morning, Estella ventured outside the wickiup. The hidden canyon took her breath away, a verdant secret nestled within barren cliffs. A small stream cascaded down one rock face, collecting in a clear pool before meandering across the canyon floor. Several wickiups stood in a loose circle, though only Atohi's showed signs of habitation. Scattered between them were the remnants of cooking fires, tanning racks, and stone-lined storage pits, ghosts of a community long vanished. She spotted Atoi kneeling by the stream, filling water pouches. Tentatively, she approached. "May I help?" she asked. He glanced up, surprise briefly crossing his stoic features. "Better now?" "Yes, thanks to you." She knelt beside him, careful of her still tender ankles. "I cannot remain idle while you do everything." He handed her a clay bowl. "Good, learning begins." What followed was an education unlike any Estella had known. Atoi led her through the canyon, identifying plants safe to eat, showing her which could heal burns, which could soothe pain. His Spanish vocabulary expanded when necessary to name things or explain their uses. Otherwise, he remained a man of few words. By midday, they sat together beneath a twisted juniper, sharing a meal of pine nuts and dried berries. The silence between them had grown comfortable rather than strained. "I was a merchant's daughter," Estella said suddenly, surprising herself with the disclosure. "In Sonora. My father was Spanish, my mother Mexican with Yaqui blood." She traced patterns in the dust with her finger. "The slavers came during siesta. They killed my father when he tried to protect me." Atoi listened without interrupting, his dark eyes watching her face. "They took me north with others, mostly women, some children, those who could not keep pace. She didn't finish the sentence. "When I tried to help a young girl escape, they decided to make an example. That's when you found me." She looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "Why were you there? In that empty place?" Atoi was silent, so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he placed a hand over his heart. "The desert speaks." "I listen. That evening, Atoi brought out a clay bowl, unlike the others, its surface etched with intricate designs and painted with natural pigments. He set it between them as they sat, before the evening fire, outside his wickiup. "Special bowl," he explained, filling it with a fragrant stew. "For sharing stories." He offered her the first portion, an honor she recognized from her mother's teachings about indigenous customs. "My people believe," he began, then paused, searching for words. "When we share food, we share life." It was the longest sentence. He had spoken. Estella accepted the bowl, touched by the significance of the gesture. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the food, for my life." As they passed the bowl between them, something shifted in their relationship, a tentative bridge forming across the chasm of their different worlds. When Atoi finally spoke again, his voice carried the weight of rarely spoken thoughts. "Why did I save you?" He echoed her earlier question. Some chains should be broken. He looked down at his own wrists, where Estella noticed for the first. Time the faint scars circling them. All chains. In that moment, Estella understood they were connected by more than circumstance. Both had known captivity's bitter taste. Both carried wounds visible and hidden. As darkness wrapped around them like a blanket, the fire's glow illuminated two survivors beginning to see each other truly for the first time. A week passed. Estella's hands grew calloused from grinding maize, stretching hides, and gathering firewood. The routine of canyon life settled around her like a comfortable shawl morning prayers with Atoi at sunrise. Work throughout the cool hours, lessons in survival during the afternoons, and stories by the fire as darkness fell. But questions still gnawed at her. Who was this man, really? What history lay behind his quiet competence and the shadows that sometimes darkened his eyes? One morning, while Atoi hunted in the high country, Estella searched for the sage he had requested. Inside his wickiup, she spotted his medicine pouch, hanging from a center pole. She hesitated, knowing its sacred nature, but curiosity overcame respect. With gentle fingers, she untied the leather strings. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of buckskin, lay a torn photograph, its edges yellowed. One corner burned away. A partial image remained. A woman in a calico dress standing beside a uniformed man whose face was mostly torn away. Only his arm remained visible, wrapped around the woman's waist. At the bottom, barely legible, Fort Bowie, 1873. Hearing footsteps, Estella hastily returned the photograph and retied the pouch. She was grinding herbs when Atoi entered, carrying a brace of rabbits. "You went through my things," he said flatly, not a question but a statement. His expression remained unreadable, but tension radiated from him. Estella straightened, refusing to hide behind lies. "Yes, I wanted to know more about the man who saved my life. And now? I know only that you carry a memory. A woman. A soldier." She paused. "Were you a scout for the army?" The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Finally, Atohi set down the rabbits and sank on to a woven mat. "Yes." The word seemed dragged from deep within him. Long ago, before ... When he didn't continue, Estella knelt before him. Before what? His hand rose to touch the old scar that ran along his temple, usually hidden by his hair. "Before I lost ... names, faces." His eyes met hers, pain evident in their depths. Memories come in pieces. Like broken pottery, understanding dawned. "You don't remember who you were." "I remember skills, tracking, hunting, medicine." His hands clenched. "Remember songs, prayers, but people ... He shook his head. Gone, like smoke. Estella's heart ached for him. A man with no past, living alone with fragments of memory. The woman in the photograph? I think ... my wife. Uncertainty clouded his features. Sometimes I hear a woman singing. Sometimes I see children running, but their faces. He made a gesture like mist dissolving. The revelation hung between them, reshaping everything Estella had assumed about him. Not a solitary warrior by choice, but a man robbed of his identity, his connections. "How did it happen?" she asked gently. "Betrayal," his voice hardened. "Men I trusted. A blow to the head." He touched the scar again. "Woke alone in the desert. Wandered until the people found me. They named me Atoi, the woods. Because they found you there?" "Because I was lost in them." For the first time, a ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Inside?" He tapped his temple. "Lost in the woods of my mind." Impulsively, Estella reached out, covering his hand with hers. "My father believed that, even." When memory fails, the heart remembers what matters most. Atoi studied their joined hands. "Your father was wise." "That's why I left Sonora," she continued. "After his death, I wanted to find my mother's people in the north." To remember who? I and through them. A shared understanding passed between them, two souls adrift, seeking anchors in a world that had torn away their foundations. In the quiet of the wickiup, as afternoon light filtered through smoke holes, something new took root. Not quite trust, not yet friendship, but a recognition of kindred spirits. When Atoi spoke again, his voice carried a gentleness Estella hadn't heard before. Tomorrow, I show you the hidden spring. Sacred place. The invitation felt significant, a door opening into his closely guarded world. Dawn painted the canyon walls in hues of amber and rose as Atoi led Estella along a narrow path that wound upward through the stone. They climbed in silence, their breath visible in the cool morning air. After nearly an hour, the path disappeared into a crevice barely wide enough for a person to slip through. Follow close, Atoi instructed, vanishing into the shadows. Estella hesitated, then squeezed through the opening. The passage twisted through absolute darkness before suddenly opening into a chamber bathed in ethereal light. Water trickled down moss-covered walls into a pool so clear it seemed like liquid crystal. Above, a natural skylight in the cave ceiling allowed a perfect shaft of sunlight to penetrate the depths. The heart of the mountain, Atoi said reverently. Place of healing. He knelt beside the pool, motioning for her to join him. From a small pouch at his waist, he removed a pinch of yellow powder corn pollen. Estella recognized and sprinkled it on the water surface. Water is life, he explained, carries away what harms us. He dipped his fingers into the pool, touched them to his forehead, lips, and heart. Cleanse his body, spirit. Estella mirrored his actions, feeling the cool water against her skin like a benediction. The Apache believe mountain spirits watch over sacred places. Atoi continued, his voice softening in the chamber's perfect acoustics. They guide lost souls home. Are you lost, Atoi? Estella asked gently. He considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Less each day. He reached into the water, retrieving a smooth stone from the bottom. After studying it briefly, he offered it to Estella. For strength, he said. When paths grow dark. The stone fit perfectly in her palm, cool and somehow comforting. As she closed her fingers around it, Atoi reached above her head. She remained still as he carefully placed something in her hair. Eagle feather, he explained. Protection, wisdom. Estella touched it gingerly. I'm not worthy of such a gift. Not for worthiness, for need. His eyes held hers. Long journey ahead. For both of us, she agreed. Later, as sunlight warmed the canyon floor, Atoi taught Estella to prepare medicinal tea from willow bark. For pain, he explained, crushing the bark with practiced movements. Like your headaches? She asked, having noticed how he sometimes pressed his palms against his temples when he thought she wasn't watching. Surprise flickered across his face. Yes, come when memories try to return. Do you want them to return? She asked, stirring. The mixture as he had shown her. Atoi was silent for a long moment. Yes, no. He sighed. Old life gone. But without knowing it, you feel incomplete, Estella finished for him. He nodded, gratitude in his eyes for her understanding. That evening, as they sat beside the fire sharing a meal, Atohi began to hum softly, a melody with a gentle swaying rhythm. Estella listened, entranced by this new aspect of him. It's beautiful, she said when he finished. What is it? Not sure, he admitted. Comes to me when hands are busy. Maybe a lullaby. For your children? She ventured. Pain crossed his features. Perhaps. Impulsively, Estella began to sing a song. Her mother had taught her, a simple melody about stars guiding travelers home. After a moment, Atoi joined her, their voices blending in the night air. When the song ended, something had changed between them. The silence held warmth rather than distance. I had a dream last night, Estella said softly. I saw a camp. Soldiers. an Apache together. A woman in a blue dress, singing while a man played a bone flute. Atohi's head snapped up. What man? I couldn't see his face, she replied, but on his wrist was a bracelet of silver concos, like the one you wear. His hand moved unconsciously to touch the bracelet partially hidden beneath his sleeve. His expression grew troubled. Dreams sometimes show what eyes cannot see, he said finally. Tomorrow we share dreams at sunrise. Apache way. As Estella prepared for sleep that night, she found herself watching Atohi with new awareness. In the firelight, his profile was strong, his movements graceful despite his years. She wondered what he had been like before loss carved him into this solitary figure, and she wondered why her heart quickened when he said her name. The morning dawned clear and cool. Estella sat cross-legged beside Atoi on a flat rock overlooking the canyon, facing the rising sun. Between them lay a small bundle of sage, sending fragrant smoke spiraling skyward. Dreams travel between worlds, Atoi explained, passing his hands through the smoke. When we share them, we honor their message. Estella mimicked his movements. In my mother's village, they said dreams are the soul's way of speaking what the mouth cannot. Atoi nodded approvingly. Wise teaching. He gestured for her to begin. She described her dream again, the camp, the woman in blue, the man with the silver bracelet playing a bone flute. As she spoke, Atohi's expression remained carefully neutral, but his fingers drummed restlessly against his knee. When she finished, he closed his eyes briefly. The woman in blue. What color was her hair? Estella frowned, trying to recall. Dark, with dot streaks of copper in the sunlight. A barely perceptible flinch. Her eyes? Green, I think, like river stones. Atohi's breath caught. He turned away, but not before Estella glimpsed raw emotion on his face. You knew her, she said softly. Perhaps. His voice was tight. Memory stirs, but does not awaken. They sat in silence until Atoi rose abruptly. Hunting today. Deer signs. On the northern ridge. Estella watched him gather his bow and quiver, movements precise but tense. May I come with you? I can help carry what you kill. He seemed about to refuse, then nodded curtly. Stay close. Step where I step. They left the canyon through a different passage than Estella had seen before, a switchback trail that climbed steeply up the western wall. At the rim, the desert stretched before them, harsh and beautiful in the morning light. Atoi moved silently across the landscape, reading signs invisible to Estella's untrained eyes. She followed as instructed, placing her feet exactly where his had been. After an hour of trekking, Atoi suddenly froze, dropping into a crouch. Estella did the same, watching as he studied the ground intently. His expression darkened. What is? Kit? She whispered. Then he pointed to marks in the sand that to Estella looked like nothing special. 3, maybe 4. Boots, spurs. He traced the air above the tracks. Heavy, armed. Fear coiled in Estella's stomach. Slavers? Atoi nodded, grimly. 2 days old. Heading east. He scanned the horizon, eyes narrowed. But they turned. See? He indicated a place where the tracks converged. Something caught their attention. They followed the new direction of the tracks for half a mile before Atoi stopped again. This time, Estella could see what concerned him, the remains of a small fire, carefully buried but exposed by the wind. Mine, Atoi said, his voice tight, from hunting. 5 days ago. The implication hung in the air between them. The slavers had found signs of habitation and changed course to investigate. They're looking for people, Estella whispered. Looking. For me. Atoi's hand went to his knife. Or me. They exchanged a look of shared understanding. Neither was safe if the slavers were hunting in these lands. We should go back, Estella suggested. The canyon is hidden. Atoi shook his head. Must. No more. How many? How close? He pointed to the west. You return. Follow our tracks exactly. I will scout. No. The word came out more forcefully than Estella intended. We stay together. Surprise flickered across Atohi's face, followed by what might have been respect. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Stay low. Silent. They moved with exaggerated caution, following the tracks toward a rocky outcropping. As they crested a small rise, Atoi suddenly pulled Estella down beside him. In the distance, barely visible through the heat waves, 4 riders moved slowly across the desert floor, stopping occasionally to examine the ground. Looking for trail signs, Atoi murmured. Experienced trackers. One rider pointed toward the mesa behind which their canyon lay hidden. Even from this distance, Estella could see the glint of rifles across their saddles. They'll find the canyon, she whispered, dread building inside her. Eventually. Atohi's face hardened into lines of determination. Not if we stop them first. They returned to the canyon by a circuitous route, careful to leave minimal traces of their passage. Atoi moved with the heightened awareness of a hunted animal, eyes constantly scanning, nostrils flaring to catch unfamiliar scents on the breeze. Once safely inside the canyon's embrace, he wasted no time. Must prepare. They will find us. How? Long do we have? Estella asked, following him to his wickiup. 3 days, maybe 4. He pulled a worn leather case from beneath his sleeping mat and unwrapped it. Inside lay an obsidian knife, its blade gleaming with deadly perfection. For you. Estella stared at the weapon. I don't know how to use it. I will teach you. Atoi placed the knife in her hand, closing her fingers around the handle. Hold like this. Blade away from thumb. The knife felt alien in her grip, its weight unsettling. Atohi's hand covered hers, adjusting her fingers. Not for throwing, he explained, for close fighting, when there is no choice. His proximity sent an unexpected warmth through her body. She could smell the sage and cedar on his skin, feel the calluses on his palm as he guided her hand through proper movements. Like this? She asked, making a slashing motion. No. He stepped behind her, his chest against her back, his arm following hers. From here, he guided her arm in an upward thrust. Strength comes from legs, not arm. Estella was acutely aware of his breath against her hair, the solid presence of his body supporting hers. The lesson continued, his voice calm and instructive, while her heartbeat seemed anything but steady. When they separated, a strange awkwardness hung between them. Atoi cleared his throat. Practice, he said, stepping back, while I checked the canyon entrance. Over the next 2 days, they transformed the peaceful canyon into a defensible position. Atoi showed Estella how to arrange stones to create natural alarms that would rattle if disturbed. Together, they reinforced the narrow entrance, prepared escape routes, and gathered supplies that could be quickly transported if they needed to flee deeper into the mountains. On the 3rd morning, Estella found Atoi by the stream, applying red and black pigments to his face in precise patterns. War. Paint, he explained, seeing her curiosity. Protection. Makes the spirit strong. My mother said her people painted their faces before battle too, Estella said, kneeling beside him. She said it turned men into thunder beings. A ghost of a smile touched Atohi's lips. Thunder beings. Yes. He studied her face. Would you? Wear the marks? The question surprised her. Is that allowed? I'm not Apache. The marks protect anyone with a warrior's heart. He held up the small clay pot of pigment. You fight for your life. That makes you a warrior. Moved by his words, Estella nodded. With careful precision, Atohi applied 2 red lines across her cheekbones and a black band across her forehead. His touch was gentle, his focus absolute. When he finished, he handed her a polished piece of mica to see her reflection. The face that looked back seemed both familiar and strange, her features transformed by the stark designs, her eyes seeming darker, more determined. "Now we are ready," Atoi said, satisfaction in his voice. That night they sat together by a small fire, weapons close at hand. The obsidian knife rested on Estella's lap, still uncomfortable, but no longer foreign to her grip. "What if they find the canyon?" she asked. "Then we fight," Atoi said simply. "Or we run. Depends on how many." "And if we run? Where would we go?" He considered the question. "North, to Apache lands, or west, to Navajo territories." "We?" The word hung between them, a question unto itself. Atoi met her gaze steadily. "Unless you wish different path." "No," Estella said softly. "I don't wish a different path." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a tension releasing from his shoulders. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched the ceremonial marks on her cheek. "2 days ago," he said, "I heard you singing by the stream." Estella nodded, remembering the old lullaby she'd sung while washing clothes. "It woke something," he continued, struggling for words. "A memory. Children playing. A woman with copper in her hair." His fingers trembled slightly against her skin. But her face was not clear. "Yours was." Atoi acknowledged this with a nod. No choice. Must learn what they intend. As they watched, a rider approached the camp, one of the searchers returning. The newcomer's arrival caused a stir, men gathering around as he dismounted and strode toward Varga's tent. "Something's happened," Atoi murmured. They retreated from the rim and made their way back to the horses. After a cold meal of jerky and dried fruit, they prepared for the night's reconnaissance. Atoi stripped to the waist, using mud to darken his skin further. Estella helped him remove the last traces of war paint. "If I'm not back by dawn, ride north," he told her, checking his knife. "Follow the North Star until you reach Navajo lands." Estella shook her head. "I'll wait 1 day. If you don't return, I'll go into the camp myself." "Too dangerous," he echoed her earlier words. "Exactly," she replied, holding his gaze steadily. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Stubborn woman." "Survivor," she corrected. "Like you taught me." When darkness fell, Atoi prepared to leave. At the last moment, Estella pressed something into his hand, the smooth stone from the sacred pool. "For strength," she reminded him, "when paths grow dark." His fingers closed around it. Without words, he kissed her, no longer tentative but sure and deep, a promise in the pressure of his lips against hers. Then he was gone, a shadow melting into shadows. Estella kept vigil, watching the distant flicker of the slavers' campfires, fighting the urge to follow. Hours passed. The moon rose and began its slow arc across the sky. Still no sign of Atohi. Near midnight, she heard a sound, the soft scuff of a moccasin on stone. She drew her knife, heart pounding, then relaxed as Atohi's familiar silhouette appeared. "You're safe," she breathed, relief flooding through her. "For now." His voice was tight, troubled. "Found this." He held out a silver medallion dangling from a leather thong. "In Varga's tent." In the moonlight, Estella could make out the embossed image of a saint on the medallion's face. "What is it?" "Mine," Atoi said simply. "From before." His hand went to his throat, where no such medallion hung. Varga took it when ... The memory seemed to strike him physically. He sank to his knees, pressing his palms against his temples. "Atoi." Estella knelt beside him, helpless against the pain that gripped him. "I remember," he gasped. "Yellow Canyon. My wife, children." His breath came in harsh pants. "After the fighting, Varga found me. Not dead. Said I'd be useful. made me guide them. Each word seemed torn from him. Threatened to kill my family if I refused. Estella held him as the memories crashed through the barriers of years. For 2 seasons, I led them to camps, but always warned the people first, helped them escape. When Varga discovered my betrayal, double quotes, Atohi's voice broke. He killed them anyway. My wife, my son and daughter, made me watch. Then this, he touched. The scar on his temple left me for dead. Estella's tears fell silently, for his loss and for the burden he had carried unknowing for so long. Now I remember, he whispered, everything. They rode at first light, not towards safety, but parallel. To the slavers' camp, keeping to high ground. Atoi had changed overnight grief, and rage had hardened into cold purpose. The return of his memories seemed to have restored not just his past, but parts of himself long buried. I know these men now, he told Estella as they paused to water. The horses at a seep spring, their patterns, their weaknesses. What did you learn in the camp? She asked. Varga offers gold for both of us. The search widens. His eyes, once warm when they looked upon her, now burned with a dangerous fire. They captured 2 Apache women yesterday. Girls, really. No older than 16. Estella's stomach clenched. She knew too well what fate awaited such captives. We can't leave them, she said. No. Atoi checked his weapons with practiced efficiency. But saving them complicates everything. They continued riding until midday, when Atohi led them to a narrow canyon, unlike the one they had abandoned. This, one shallow, offering multiple escape routes. Rest, he instructed. We move tonight. But as Estella dismounted, she noticed his expression change. What's wrong? You should go north from here, he said, not meeting her eyes. I'll create a diversion. Draw them away. I decided differently. His voice was flat. This is my fight. Anger flared in Estella's chest. And mine. Varga killed my father. Ordered my captivity. He'll kill you too. Atoi finally looked at her, his face a mask of control, betrayed only by the pain in his eyes. I've lost everyone I ever ... He stopped, unable to continue. Ever what? Estella pressed, stepping closer. Loved, he finished, the word barely audible. The declaration hung between them, unexpected, despite all that had passed between them. Estella reached for him, but he stepped back. That's why you must go, he insisted. I cannot watch you die too. You won't, she said firmly, because we fight together. 2 survive where one would fall. Estella. No, she cut him off. I'm not the helpless woman you found chained to die. You made me stronger. Now let me use that strength. They stared at each other, locked in silent battle of wills. Finally, Atohi's shoulders slumped slightly. Together then, he conceded. But you follow my lead exactly. After securing the horses with enough slack to graze, but not wander, they prepared for the night's work. Atoi drew a map in the dirt, showing the layout of the slaver camp. He detailed guard positions, tent locations, and the most likely place the captive women would be held. As twilight deepened into darkness, they made their final preparations. Atoi handed Estella a small pouch. If we're separated, he said, follow these. He showed her the contents, small stones with symbols painted on them. Trail markers, she recognized. Like those used by Apache scouts. He nodded. Drop one every 100 paces. I'll find you. A gesture touched her deeply, even now. Planning for battle, he thought of her safety. She tucked the pouch securely. At her waist, they moved silently through the desert night, approaching the camp from downwind. The slavers had grown careless, confident in their numbers. Only 2 men stood watch, and one appeared to be dozing. Atohi pointed to a tent slightly apart from the others, near where the horses were picketed. 2 guards sat outside it more security than elsewhere in the camp. The captives, undoubtedly Dot. He leaned close, his breath warm against Estella's ear. I create distraction at the south end. When guards respond, you free the women. Take horses. Ride north along the dry creek bed. And you? She whispered. I'll find you. He squeezed her hand briefly. Remember what I taught you. Before she could respond, he melted into the darkness. Estella positioned herself behind a boulder with a clear view of the captive's tent, knife ready, heart pounding against her ribs. The minutes stretched endlessly as she waited for Atohi's signal. Then it came a series of sharp, strange calls, like a coyote, but not quite right, from the far side of camp. A moment later, something bright arced through the night sky, landing among the supply wagons. Fire erupted instantly. Shouts of alarm echoed through the camp as men scrambled toward the blaze. The guards at the women's tent hesitated, torn between their duty and the emergency. When gunfire erupted from the darkness, they made their decision. Rushing toward the commotion, Estella's moment had come. Estella darted from shadow to shadow, the obsidian knife clutched in her right hand. The chaos at the far end of camp provided perfect cover, men shouting, horses whinnying in alarm, the crackle of flames consuming dry wood. No one noticed the slim figure slipping between tents. Reaching the captive's tent, she paused, listening. Soft weeping came from within. Carefully, she cut a slit in the back of the canvas and peered inside. 2 young women huddled together on a blanket, their ankles chained but hands free. Their dark eyes widened in surprise at the sight of Estella's face appearing through the canvas. Silence, Estella whispered in Spanish, hoping they understood. She made a cutting motion, then pointed to the chains. One of the girls nodded, whispering something to her companion. Estella widened the opening and slipped inside. Up close, she could see the bruises on their faces, the fear in their eyes. Using skills Atoi had taught her, she worked on their ankle chains, blessing him silently for insisting she learn. The lock clicked open. Estella gestured toward the opening in the tent. Follow. Stay low. Leading them out, she pointed toward the horse pickets. Wait behind those rocks. I'll bring horses. The girls disappeared into the shadows as Estella approached the tethered animals. Selecting 3 sturdy-looking mounts, she quietly untied them, grateful that the commotion at the other end of camp had frightened them into uncharacteristic stillness. A shout went up. Someone had discovered the empty tent. Time was running out. Estella led the horses to where the girls waited, helped them mount, and swung onto the 3rd horse herself. North, she directed, pointing up the dry creek bed. Go. They rode hard, bent low over their horses' necks. Behind them, more shouts erupted as the slavers organized a pursuit. Gunfire crackled, but they were already beyond accurate range in the darkness. The creek bed offered good footing and concealment, its banks high enough to hide riders from casual observation. Estella glanced back frequently, watching for signs of Atoi. Nothing. After a mile, the creek bed forked. Estella hesitated, unsure which way to turn. One of the Apache girls pointed decisively to the left branch. Having no better option, Estella followed her lead. The path narrowed, forcing them to ride single file. Branches whipped at their faces as the vegetation grew thicker, a sign of water somewhere ahead. The sound of pursuit had faded, but Estella knew it wouldn't be long before the slavers picked. Up their trail, they emerged suddenly into a small clearing beside a spring-fed pool. The girls dismounted quickly, one keeping watch while the other erased their tracks with a branch. Their efficiency spoke of training, similar to what Atoi had taught Estella. Atoi, Estella said, touching her chest, then gesturing back the way they had come. Friend. The taller girl nodded. Apache scout, she replied in halting Spanish. known. This surprised Estella. You know him? The girl made a rocking motion with her arms. Stories from childhood. The scout who betrayed betrayers. Before Estella could ask more, a sound caught their attention, a low, melodic whistle, like a mourning dove, but the distinctive pattern. The girls relaxed visibly. Friend, the taller one confirmed Dot from the underbrush, emerged not Atoi, but an elderly Apache man, his face deeply lined, his movements cautious but deliberate. He carried a bone flute in one hand. The girls rushed to him, speaking rapidly in Apache. He embraced them briefly, relief evident in his weathered features. When he approached Estella, his dark eyes studied her intently. You freed them, he said in surprisingly good Spanish. Not alone, Estella replied. Atoi helped. At the name, the old man went still. Atohi lives? Yes, he was creating a diversion so we could escape. The old man's expression grew troubled. Dangerous. Varga is there. You know of Varga? Estella asked, alarmed. He touched a long scar that ran from his temple to his jaw. All Apache know this devil. Where is Atoi now? He said he would find me. I left markers. The old man nodded. Approvingly. Good, but not safe here? Come. He gestured toward a nearly invisible path leading up from the spring. My camp is hidden, protected. Estella hesitated, torn between following safety and waiting for, Atohi Dot reading her indecision. The old man raised his bone flute. With this, I can call him. He will hear and find us. How can you be sure? A smile creased the old man's face. Because I taught him the calls when he was a boy. The old man's camp was well concealed in a rocky alcove halfway up the canyon. Wall a small space with a natural roof formed by an overhanging ledge. A tiny, smokeless fire provided just enough light to see by without revealing their position to searching eyes. I am Nantai, the old man introduced himself as he tended to the two Apache girls, checking them for injuries. These are my granddaughters, Luyu and Talasi. Estella watched him work, noting his gentle efficiency like Atoi's. How do you know Atoi? Nantai's hands paused briefly. He was called differently then. Kaga was his name, Raven. I taught him to track, to hunt, to listen to the desert. Pride mingled with sorrow in his voice. Until the army took him for a scout. He told me little of his past, Estella said carefully. Only fragments. His mind was injured, Nantai nodded. We heard stories. That he lived but wandered without memory. He looked up at Estella. You healed him? No, Varga did. At Nantai's puzzled expression, she explained. Seeing Varga's things, a medallion brought his memories back. Nantai's face darkened. Varga, the worst of the slave traders. Many of our people lost to him. He glanced at his granddaughters. Many women. The girls had settled on a blanket, exhaustion finally overtaking fear. Luyu, the elder, remained alert despite her drooping eyelids. They took us from our gathering party, she told Estella in her limited Spanish. 3 days ago. Killed the others. Talasi, the younger, said something in Apache. Luyu translated. She says you fight like Apache woman, not afraid. Estella smiled. Sadly, I was afraid, but fear doesn't help when you must act. Nantai nodded approvingly. Wisdom. He turned to watch the canyon below. Dawn soon. If your Atoi lives, he will come with first light. And if he doesn't? The question caught in Estella's throat. The old man's eyes were kind but realistic. Then we honor his sacrifice by surviving. They settled into watchful waiting. Estella found herself fingering the obsidian knife, drawing comfort from its solidity. Sometime later, Nantai seated himself beside her, offering a small pouch of dried berries. You love him, he observed without preamble. Estella didn't deny it. Yes, even knowing his past, what he did as a scout? He was forced, she said defensively. Varga threatened his family. I know. Nantai's voice held no judgment. But many would not understand, would only see betrayal. I see a man who tried to protect what he loved, who suffered for his choices. Estella met the old man's gaze directly. Who saved me when he had no reason to. Nantai studied her for a long moment. Perhaps that was his reason. To save one where he could not save others. The eastern sky had begun to lighten when they heard it, the soft, melodic whistle of a morning dove with the same distinctive pattern Nantai had used earlier. The old man rose immediately, returning the call. Minutes later, Atoi appeared at the edge of their alcove, disheveled and bloodied, but very much alive. His eyes found Estella instantly, relief washing over his features. You found the old man, he said, dropping to one knee in exhaustion. He found us, Estella corrected, moving to his side. You're hurt, surface wounds. Atoi turned to Nantai, speaking in Apache. The old man responded in kind, emotion evident in both their voices. They clasped forearms in a warrior's greeting. My teacher, Atoi explained to Estella. When I was a boy, he called you Kaga, she said. A shadow crossed Atoi's face. A name from before, from a life that ended at Yellow Canyon. Nantai spoke sharply in Apache. Atoi responded with resignation. The old man turned to Estella. He says he is dead to his people, that Kaga died with his family. Nantai shook his head, disapprovingly. But I say, the river may change course, but it remains the same water. While Nantai tended to Atohi's wounds, a bullet grazed along his ribs. Cuts on his arms and face. Estella gathered flat stones from outside the alcove. Under Luyu's curious gaze, she arranged them in a rough circle. What do you make? The girl asked. A map, Estella replied, to plan our next steps. When Atoi joined them, moving stiffly, but with determination, Estella had completed her stone map, the dry creek bed, the slaver camp, their current position, and the surrounding landmarks. Varga searches for us, Atoi confirmed, studying. Her work. 10 men, splitting into pairs to cover more ground. Then we have little time, Nantai said. What is your plan, Kaga? Instead of correcting the name, Atoi knelt beside the stone map. With calm precision, he began to outline a strategy that would end either in their freedom or their deaths. They moved at dusk, when shadows lengthened and the desert prepared for its brief transition from scorching heat to bitter cold. Atoi led the way, his newly reclaimed bow slung across his back, a weapon Nantai had preserved for years, hoping his former pupil might someday return to claim it. The bow remembers your hand, the old man had said when presenting it, as the people remember your courage at Yellow Canyon. Now that bow would serve a final purpose. Estella watched Atoi test its draw, his movements fluid despite his injuries. The weapon seemed to transform him, completing the warrior that had always existed beneath the surface of the quiet healer she had first known. Their plan was dangerous in its simplicity. Rather than flee, which would only prolong the inevitable pursuit, they would confront Varga directly. Nantai and his granddaughters would head north toward Apache lands, carrying word to scattered bands about the slavers' renewed activities. Meanwhile, Atoi and Estella would circle back toward the slavers' camp, using the confusion of multiple search parties to their advantage. Divide and conquer. Estella had summarized when they finalized the plan over the stone map. An old strategy, Nantai agreed, but effective when the enemy is arrogant. Now, as they parted ways at a fork in the canyon, the old man clasped Atohi's forearm one final time. Remember who you are, Kaga, he said firmly, not who they tried to make you. Atoi nodded, emotion briefly tightening his features. Protect the girls, and you protect her." Nantai glanced at Estella with approval. "She carries the spirit of our strongest women." As the three Apache figures disappeared into the gathering darkness, Atohi and Estella began their own careful journey. They traveled light water, weapons, a small bundle of provisions. Speed and stealth would be their allies. "Nantai said something to you before he left," Estella said, as they picked their way along a narrow game trail. "Something that troubled you." Atoi walked several paces before answering. "He said I must accept forgiveness to be whole again." "Do you think that's possible?" His profile was stark against the darkening sky. "Some debts cannot be repaid." "This isn't about repayment," Estella countered gently. "It's about allowing yourself to live again." He glanced at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "Is that what I'm doing with you? Living again? Aren't we both?" The question hung between them as they continued their journey. A truth neither had fully articulated until now. Two broken people finding wholeness in each other's company. They made camp briefly in a shallow cave, resting for a few hours before the most dangerous phase of their plan. As Atoi checked his weapons one final time, Estella studied him in the faint moonlight filtering through the cave entrance. "If we succeed," she began hesitantly, "what then?" "Freedom," he answered simply. "And after freedom?" Atohi's hands stilled their work. "I haven't thought beyond survival for many years. Perhaps it's time to start." Estella moved closer, her voice soft but insistent. "What do you want, Atoi? Not what you owe or what you must do. What do you want?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing a future he had never allowed himself to imagine. "Peace," he said finally. "A place where the past cannot follow." And he reached out, his calloused fingers gently brushing her cheek, someone to share it with. Estella leaned into his touch. "And we have something worth fighting for." They left their shelter in the darkest hour before dawn, moving like shadows across the landscape. According to Atohi's tracking, 2 of Varga's search parties had made camp less than a mile away. Beyond them lay the main camp, where Varga himself would be planning his next move. "Remember," Atoi whispered, as they paused on a ridge overlooking the slaver position, "we need only create enough confusion to draw Varga out. Once the head is cut off, the body will scatter." Estella nodded, adjusting the obsidian knife at her belt. Fear coursed through her veins, but alongside it ran a powerful current of determination. Whatever happened in the coming hours, she would face it standing tall, no longer the helpless captive, but a woman who had found her strength in the wilderness. "For my father," she murmured. "For my family," Atoi added. Their eyes met in perfect understanding. Then, with practiced silence, they began their descent toward the enemy camp. The slaver sentries never saw death coming. Atoi moved like a spirit through the pre-dawn darkness, his knife finding its mark with terrible precision. No sound, no warning, just the soft thud of bodies meeting earth. Estella followed, securing weapons, checking for papers or maps that might prove useful. 4 men, Atoi whispered when they regrouped. 6 remain with Varga. Odds still unfavorable, but better than before. They dragged the bodies into brush, buying time before the alarm would be raised. Atoi quickly prepared 4 arrows, wrapping their tips with cloth soaked in fat rendered from their provisions. "Fire arrows," he explained, striking flint to steel. "For confusion." The first arrow sailed high, arcing through darkness to land, among the slavers' supply wagons. Within moments, dry canvas and wooden crates caught flame. The second and third followed different trajectories, igniting tents on opposite sides of the camp. Chaos erupted instantly. Men stumbled from bedrolls, shouting contradictory orders. Horses whinnied in panic, straining against their tethers. In the center of the mayhem stood a tall figure, Varga himself, barking commands, imposing order through sheer force of will. Estella's breath caught at the sight of him. The man who had ordered her father's execution, who had sentenced her to die chained to a rock, stood less than 100 yards away. Hatred surged through her, so powerful it made her hands tremble. Atohi's touch steadied her. "Not yet," he murmured. "Wait." The fourth arrow remained nocked, but unlit. Atoi watched the unfolding scene with calculating eyes, waiting for the perfect moment. When Varga moved to help contain a particularly fierce blaze, exposing himself, Atoi released his breath slowly and drew the bowstring to his cheek. "For those who cannot seek their own justice," he whispered, and let fly. The arrow struck true, burying itself in Varga's thigh. The slaver's scream of pain and rage echoed across the camp. Men rushed to his aid as he collapsed, clutching the shaft protruding from his leg. "Now," Atoi said, slinging his bow and drawing his knife, "remember Varga is the target. Nothing else matters." They separated, approaching the camp from different directions. Estella circled wide, using the confusion of the fires to slip between tents. 2 slavers passed within arm's reach, never noticing her shadow. Her goal was clear reach. Varga, while Atoi created further distraction. Across the camp, Atoi had begun his own assault. His war cry, the same blood-chilling sound Estella had heard in the canyon, froze men in their tracks. He struck like lightning, wounding rather than killing when possible, always moving, never presenting a clear target. Estella reached the command tent just as Varga was being helped inside by 2 men. Through the open flap, she could see him cursing as someone examined his wound. The arrow had been broken off, leaving the head embedded in flesh. She waited, knife ready, for the moment when the tent would empty of all but her target. Minutes stretched endlessly, punctuated by shouts and gunfire as Atoi continued his assault. Finally, opportunity arrived. The last assistant departed, rushing to help with a collapsed wagon that threatened to spread fire to the ammunition stores. Varga lay alone, pale with pain but still alert, a pistol clutched in his hand. Estella slipped inside, moving silently as Atoi had taught her. She was nearly upon him when a floorboard creaked. Varga whirled, pistol rising. The shot went wide. As Estella dropped to the ground, rolling as she'd practiced countless times in the canyon. Coming up inside Varga's guard, she struck not a killing blow, but one that sent the pistol flying from his grasp. Recognition dawned in his eyes. "The merchant's daughter," he spat, "should have left you to die in the desert." "Yes," Estella agreed coldly. "You should have." Outside, the fighting intensified. A familiar voice cried out in pain. Atoi. Distracted, Estella didn't see Varga reach for the knife hidden in his boot. She barely avoided the slashing attack, earning a shallow cut across her forearm. They grappled briefly, Varga's superior strength nearly overwhelming her despite his wounded leg. Breaking free, Estella circled warily. Varga laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You're dead," he promised. "You and that treacherous Apache. I've hunted him for years, the scout who cost me a fortune and 6 good men. Those good men were slavers and murderers," Estella countered, keeping the obsidian knife between them. "Business," Varga shrugged. "Nothing personal." "It was personal to the families you destroyed." A cold smile spread across Varga's face. "Like your father? He died quickly, more than he deserved." Rage threatened to cloud Estella's judgment. She forced herself to breathe, to focus as Atoi had taught her. Emotion made you careless. Carelessness got you killed. "Speaking of dying, quickly," she said, "I'm afraid you won't have that luxury." Varga lunged, surprisingly agile despite his wound. Estella sidestepped, scoring a shallow cut along his arm. They circled each other in the confined space, knocking over maps and papers as the tent filled with smoke from the nearby fires. "Your Apache is probably dead by now," Varga taunted. My men know his face. Estella refused the bait, maintaining her focus. Another exchange of blows. Another retreat. She was faster, but Varga's reach was longer. His experience in brutal combat evident in every movement. A commotion outside, more shouting. A gun firing twice in rapid succession. Varga's eyes flicked toward the tent entrance. Estella seized. The moment, driving forward with the obsidian blade. Varga twisted, taking the blow on his shoulder rather than his chest. He howled in pain but managed to catch her wrist, squeezing with crushing force. A knife clattered to the ground. Varga's other hand closed around Estella's throat, lifting her until her toes barely touched the earth. Spots danced before her, eyes as she clawed ineffectually at his grip. "I'm going to enjoy watching you die slowly," Varga growled, his face inches from hers. The tent flap tore open. Atoi stood silhouetted against the fire-lit camp, blood streaming from a gash across. His forehead, his left arm hanging awkwardly. But in his right hand, his knife gleamed. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Varga's grip tightened. "Kaga, or do you prefer Atoi now? Come to watch her die like you watched your family?" Something dangerous flashed in Atohi's eyes, not rage, but a cold, implacable purpose. "Last chance." "You're in no position to make demands," Varga sneered. "One move and I snap her neck." Despite the crushing pressure on her throat, Estella managed to catch Atohi's gaze. A silent message passed between them. Trust, understanding, shared resolve. Almost imperceptibly, she nodded Dot in one fluid motion. Estella drove her knee upward with every ounce of strength she possessed. Varga doubled over, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist free. She dropped to the ground. As Atoi lunged forward, the two men collided with ferocious intensity. Varga, recovered from Estella's blow, met Atohi's charge with desperate strength. They crashed through the tent wall, tumbling onto the hard-packed earth outside. Estella scrambled for her knife, then followed through the torn canvas. Around them, the camp was in complete disarray. Several tents had collapsed in flames. Men fought the fires or fled into the darkness, their loyalty to Varga evaporating in the face of disaster. Atoi and Varga grappled in the dirt, locked in mortal combat. Despite his injuries, Atoi fought with the focused intensity of a man who had waited years for this moment. Varga, equally determined, landed a crushing blow to Atoi's wounded side. Atoi fell back, momentarily stunned. Varga seized a burning tent pole, swinging it like a club. The fiery end missed Atohi's face by inches as he rolled aside. Before Varga could strike again, Estella moved. The obsidian knife, the same blade that had represented her transformation from victim to warrior, flashed in the firelight as she drove it into Varga's back. The slaver arched in pain, the burning pole dropping from his grasp. He turned, disbelief etched on his features, and staggered toward Estella with murderous intent. He never reached her. Atoi rose like an avenging spirit, catching Varga in mid-stride. With ceremonial precision, he pressed the point of his knife against the slaver's throat. "For my wife," Atoi said, his voice steady. "For my children. For every person you enslaved." Varga's eyes widened in fear, perhaps the first genuine fear he had ever known. "Do it then," he hissed. "Finish it." Estella moved to Atohi's side, her hand finding his shoulder. The moment stretched between them, justice balanced on a knife's edge. "No," Atoi said finally, lowering his blade slightly. "Death is too easy." With a swift, precise movement, he struck Varga with the knife's handle, rendering him unconscious. As the slaver crumpled to the ground, Atoi turned to Estella, his expression a complex mixture of pain, relief, and uncertainty. "We take him to the authorities in Santa Fe," he explained. "Let him face the justice of many, not just our own." Around them, the remaining slavers had either fled or surrendered. throwing down weapons as they realized their leader had fallen. One man older than the others, with a distinctive limp, approached cautiously, hands raised. "The captives," he said, addressing Estella rather than Atoi. "There are others, in the supply wagon." Estella looked to Atoi, who nodded grimly. Together they moved toward the indicated wagon, finding 3 more women, Mexican or mestizo bound, but alive. As Estella cut their bonds, she gathered the broken chains, a tangible symbol of captivity ended. "You're free now," she told them in Spanish. "We all are." 1 month later, the canyon looked different in autumn light, softer somehow, the harsh edges of stone gilded by the low-angled sun. Estella stood at the entrance, a bundle of sage in her hands, watching as Atoi carefully positioned the final lodge pole for their new home. "It will be strong," he said, stepping back to assess his work. "Good for winter." So much had changed since that night of fire and retribution. They had brought Varga to Santa Fe in chains, a poetic justice not lost on Estella. The territorial authorities, long troubled by slaver activity but unable to catch the perpetrators, had been grimly satisfied. The surviving women had given testimony, as had Estella. Justice would be slow but certain. Word had reached them a week ago that Varga had been sentenced to hang. Estella had expected to feel triumph at the news. Instead, she felt only a quiet relief, another chain broken, another ghost laid to rest. They had returned to the hidden canyon, not as fugitives, but as builders. 3 families had joined them, including Nantai and his granddaughters. Others would come with spring, drawn by the promise of safety and a fresh start. "What are you thinking?" Atoi asked, coming to stand beside her. "That life moves in circles." Estella replied, "I began in chains, certain of death. Now I stand free, certain of life." He took her hand, his fingers entwining with hers. The silver medallion recovered from Varga's belongings gleamed at his throat, no longer a symbol of loss, but of memory honored. "The Apache believe that all journeys eventually lead home," he said, "even when the path disappears beneath our feet." Estella leaned against him, drawing comfort from his solid presence. "Is this home, then? This canyon? Home is not always a place." Atohi's arms circled her waist. "Sometimes it is a person." In the clearing below, Nantai sat with several children, teaching them to play the bone flute that had once called Atohi. Back from darkness, the simple melody floated upward, sweet and clear in the evening air. "There will be others seeking sanctuary," Estella said, "people with broken chains of their own. We will welcome them," Atoi agreed. "Show them how to heal as we have healed." Together they descended the path to join the small community gathering for the evening meal. Talasi had proven to be an excellent cook, blending Apache traditions with Mexican influences learned from Estella. Tonight, the aroma of rabbit stew with wild herbs filled the canyon dot as they ate together around the communal fire. Estella studied the faces illuminated by firelight, each marked by suffering, yet each carrying hope. Liu Yu was teaching one of the Mexican women Apache words. Nantai supervised 2 young men constructing a new wickiup. Children played in the shadows, their laughter a balm to old wounds. "I received word from the Navajo trading party," Atohi mentioned as they finished. "Their meal. 3 more families will join us before the first snow. We'll need more lodge poles." "We'll find them," Estella assured him, thinking of the straight pine trunks she'd spotted in the northern reaches of the canyon. Together, later as the moon rose over the canyon rim, they walked alone to the hidden spring where Atoi had once brought her for healing. The water still trickled down moss-covered walls. The pool still reflected starlight from above. "Do you remember what you told me here?" Estella asked softly. "About mountain spirits guiding lost souls home?" Atoi nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I was speaking of myself without knowing it, and I was listening without understanding. She turned to face him fully. But now I see clearly. You were never meant to be alone in this canyon. And I was never meant to reach my mother's people. We were meant to find each other, Atoi finished, drawing her into his embrace. Above them, an eagle circled on thermals, its cry echoing from stone to stone, a sound of freedom, of territory claimed and defended. Estella smiled at the omen. From chains to choices, from captivity to creation. The journey had scarred them both, but scars were proof of healing. As they descended toward their waiting lodge, Atoi paused to watch the sunset paint the mesa in the same fiery colors that had illuminated their first meeting. His expression held a peace Estella had never seen there before. "What do you see?" she asked. "Tomorrow," he answered simply. And all the days after. Hand in hand they walked toward home, two souls no longer chained by the past, but bound by choice to a future. They would build together,